Welcome to the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research virtually. My name is Alex Weiser. I'm the Director of Public Programs of YIVO. We're so pleased to have you all joining us for this Zoom webinar on the YIVO Sound Archive and the Klezmer Revival with YIVO's own Eléonore Biezunski. This event is part of our Centennial Celebration series. YIVO has been for 100 years a very special place for the celebration, contemplation, cultivation of Jewish history and Jewish culture. Over that time, we've amassed an archive and library with over 23 million documents and over 400,000 books, which are used by researchers both in person and around the world. And we bring to life the world of this history and this culture through our public programs like this, through our classes and exhibitions. And thank you all for joining us along this journey. So as I said, this is a part of our centennial celebration, exploring the contribution that YIVO itself has made to the field of Jewish studies and to Jewish culture. And we're really so happy to have Eléonore Biezunski to give this talk. Eléonore is an award-winning Parisian singer, violinist, songwriter, and scholar, now living in New York City. An avid collector of Yiddish music, she has led several projects and has collaborated with a large number of well-known Jewish performers in the US and abroad. Her recordings include Yerusha and Soll Sein. Her composition, Tzemoden, was voted Best New Yiddish Song by Sao Paulo's 2021 Bubby Awards. As YIVO Sound Archivist since 2016, Eléonore has coordinated the Ruth Rubin Legacy website, which I encourage you all to check out if you haven't yet. She has a PhD from the École des Hautes Études and Sciences and Socials in Paris, excuse my French, and has published several book chapters and articles on the history of Yiddish music and culture, and co-edited a reissue of the complete recording of the French LS Disc label. She's also a team member of the Klezmer Institute and is a recipient of the Niska Folk Arts Apprenticeship. She has recently published a chapter in the Oxford Handbook of Jewish Music Studies, edited by Tina Fruhauf, which is called the YIVO Sound Archive as a Living Space, Archiving and Revitalizing Klezmer. And it's this article which really, reading this article inspired this talk. There's no person who's better suited to be giving it than Eléonore. So we're really so pleased once again to welcome Eléonore to our webinar series. And thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Alex. And I will just start sharing my screen now and start with a riddle. The riddle is contained in a short excerpt from the movie A Jumping Night in the Garden of Eden, made by Michael Goldman in 1987. It was the first film to document the Klezmer revival, tracing the efforts of two founding groups, Capelier and the Klezmer Conservatory Band, to recover the lost history of Klezmer music. So please, so I'm gonna start this. We'll show you this excerpt first.
I began to question, why is it that, great Irish music and this great country music, where is the equivalent Jewish music? And the only place that I could think of going to find out about that was the YIVO. And they connected me to the folklorist at the YIVO. So she takes me downstairs to the sub-basement, and there's these huge filing cabinets, and she opens up the filing cabinets, and for the first time in my life, I knew what Howard Carter felt when he opened up the tomb at Tutankhamun. He opened it up and there was this stuff there, thousands of 78s. And here they were the Jewish records. The thing is, I don't really know, this is like a real potpourri of some of the stuff. See, this, it just needs to be... Oh, how about this? Can you, do you ever see this picture?
I don't think so, no.
Can you name that Jew? I can.
Who's this little balalaika player? That is very interesting.
So can you name that Jew is the riddle. I will not give the answer just now, but I will give you some time to guess while I go on a little bit with the presentation, and we'll come back to it. So you just saw Henry Sapoznik, banjo player, leader of the band Capelier, first sound archivist and director of the YIVO Sound Archive, discographer, producer of over 35 recordings, and Ankus Netsky, multi-instrumentalist, co-chair of New England Conservatory's Contemporary Improvisation Department, and founder and director of the Klezmer Conservatory Band. So they were going into the YIVO building in the mid-80s. This is the creation of the YIVO announced in the YIVO news. And in this talk, I would like to present the links between the establishment of the YIVO Sound Archive, also known as the Max and Frieda Weinstein Archive of YIVO Sound Recording, now housing over 20,000 sound recordings dating from 1901 to today, and the phenomenon of the revitalization of klezmer music from the 1970s until today. My main point is that the establishment of the YIVO Sound Archive in the early 1980s by a small group of activists composed of both musicians and scholars was completely integrated with the klezmer revival, and that these two events were almost two facets of a single phenomenon. The creation of the YIVO Sound Archive took place at the beginning of the 1980s in the context of the Roots movement in the United States, as young musicians, most of them playing bluegrass, old-time American music or Balkan music, were trying to reconnect, to learn, and to reappropriate their own grandparents' music, just like Henry Sapoznik was trying to reconnect with his cantor grandfather's heritage. One of the key events of the klezmer revitalization was a concert organized in 1978 by the Balkan Arts Center, now Center for Traditional Music and Dance, in honor of Dave Taras, who performed accompanied by Sam Beckerman and Max Goldberg. And here you have the answers to the riddle. Can you name that Jew? Dave Taras is probably one of the best-known klezmer clarinetists of the 20th century. Born in Ternovka, in Ukraine, he's the son of a klezmer trombonist and batron. He grew up surrounded by music and playing various instruments. In 1915, he was drafted in the army of the Tsar, but managed to stay away from the trenches thanks to his musical abilities. In 1921, he immigrated to New York City, and after working in a garment factory, figured out that he could make a living as a musician. He then started to get work as a klezmer clarinetist in several ensembles, and also recorded Greek, Polish, and Russian melodies for Columbia Records under different pseudonyms. He probably participated in around 500 recordings during his career. During the revitalization of klezmer music in the 1970s and 1980s, Dave Taras was the mentor of many young musicians who would soon become well known themselves, including the clarinetist and mandolinist Andy Statman. Dave Taras died in 1989 in Oceanside, New York. This was the 1978 concert. So here was Dave Terrace playing in 1978. And Zev Feldman, who co-organized this concert as a graduate student, wrote in his 2016 book, Klezmer Music, History and Memory, that, I quote, "The concert and the ecstatic dance party following it turned into a major cultural catharsis for New York Jews. Many then younger musicians and singers who would later involve themselves professionally in klezmer music or in Yiddish songs, such as Bob Cohen, David Krakauer, Janet Leuchter, Frank London, Henkel Snetsky, Alicia Svigals, Janet Leuchter, Paula Tettelbaum, and Josh Waletsky, avow that this one concert had a galvanizing effect." So here you see most of the people I just named on album covers from those years that were like the first sort of revival klezmer albums from the late 70s. And that concert was also the night when the young Henry Sapoznik, banjo player and leader of the band Capelier, who would then become the first sound archivist and director of YIVO Sound Archive, met the discographer Richard Spotswood, with whom he would work to document the early Jewish recording. In 1979, at YIVO, so this is how YIVO looked like back then, when it was located on Fifth Avenue and 86th Street in the Vanderbilt mansion that is now the Neue Gallery. The folklorist Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblet, was encouraging musicians and scholars to consult YIVO's music holding. She's the folklorist that Sapoznik refers to in the film. And she was also writing a grant application to conduct research on klezmer music. Howard Baker, in Art Worlds, underlines the major role of organizations in artistic change. For a music revival to take place, musicians and scholars need to work together with organizations to create the institutional structures that will support their research and their creativity. And this is specifically how the YIVO Sound Archive was born. So the project that she was writing a grant for would document in detail the traditional instrumental music of Eastern European Jews, disseminate the music through recordings and reissues of historical recordings, and the documentation effort would result in an arranged archive and guide to the collection of an excellent sound recordings of klezmer music, of recorded and transcribed life histories of the musicians, and of interviews regarding the cultural context of the music. It also took an important donation from the Weinstein family to establish the Max and Frieda Weinstein archive of YIVO sound recordings, but not without a certain amount of power of conviction from both Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblet, Adrian Cooper, who was then assistant director of Samuel Norwich, working with Samuel Norwich, who was the director then, and Norwich's own negotiating intelligence to direct this donation towards the establishment of a sound archive rather than another film similar to Josh Waletsky's Images Before My Eyes that you might have seen and is excellent, and which had impressed, for good reason, the donors. This is how Henry Sapoznik became the first sound archivist of the YIVO, initiating work aimed at first bringing together the 78s that were neglected among the vast archives of the YIVO, then on Fifth Avenue. And one of the first things that Henry Sapoznik did was to reissue historical recordings, the first of its kind. This compilation, Klezmer Music 1910-1942, came out in 1981. And according to him, I quote him, it was triggered by the founding of the Sound Archive in order to create a landing project that would make a fundamental statement about the mission of the Institute, but also, again, it was specifically about klezmer music. cataloging it, curating it, documenting it. There had actually never been a reissue. All the reissues that had come out previous to the Folkways records were made for an immigrant and nostalgia audience. I'm still quoting. So you didn't need context. If you're in nostalgia, you don't need context because the person who is being nostalgic has their own context. So this reissue project was meant to be a showcase, not just for the record collection, but for the intellectual framework of the YIVO. End of quote. In 1982, the ethnomusicologist Mark Slobin, who had just published his book Tenement Songs, redacted a detailed list of the YIVO musical holdings, introducing his presentation as followed. I quote, "Scattered among the treasures of YIVO are priceless collections of Jewish music. Acquired by chance and designed over nearly 6 decades, the YIVO music holdings offer broad panorama of media, genres, styles, composers, and resources. Little by little, the archivists, librarians, and researchers are putting the music material in order so they will become accessible to scholars, musicians, and visitors." And we are still doing this. A lot of progress was made, but we are still working on that, of course. The night of June 8th, 1982, as Sapoznik recalls in his book Klezmer, I quote, "Nearly 1,000 people jammed the corner of Fifth Avenue and East 86th Street to hear Capelier play, the first numerous concert on this corner." This photo is actually not from that concert. It's from a few years later at a festival, but it's the same corner, so it probably looked about the same. So the long process of cataloging and shaping the sound archive was about to start. The room chosen on the 5th floor of the old Vanderbilt mansion that had once been the servants' quarters was surnamed the 5th floor autonomous region. More a cell than an office, that's according to Sapoznik, the 6 by 21-foot room was dark, cramped, and stuffy. No rhyme or reason dictated where recording would be found around the building. Sapoznik soon consolidated the old commercial 78s, rare field recordings and cassette tapes of lectures and oral histories, and began a rudimentary cataloging project and acquired a modest recording and remastering equipment. So here you see Henry Sapoznik, Jenny Romaine, and Lawrence Klemberg working on the first catalog of probably commercial recordings, or they might have been working also on some field recordings that we are actually currently digitizing for a very soon to be access online. In an interview, he was telling me about the tensions that existed with the old guard of YIVO's paper archivist and the newer generation who was interested in music. People there were wondering, what's going on up there? What is this parade of people going up and down all day? Sapoznik said, "It was a clubhouse. All of the self-taught record collectors in the city would congregate there, and we would play records and we would argue, no, that's take one, no, that's take two." And there was just this. He said in this interview that I made with him, it was like a base midrash. It was like Rashi on records. I found that quite funny. End of quote. Sapoznik realized that waiting for people to come to the archives was not going to happen unless there was material published directing people to come to the archive. For that, as he was meeting resistance within YIVO to publish more historical recording, he created his own label. So things needed to be transferred and cataloged and made accessible on reference copies. And he also complained that because of the lack of continuity, the only music revival scene that was driven primarily by 78s and reissues was the Klezmer scene. All the others had masters, people they could turn to. Out of that grew the idea. How do we create community in order to create this interactive uplift? Sapoznik had been teaching at American traditional music camps and saw that the model for teaching had never been applied to teaching the Jewish music. Just like with the Spotswood discography, which was a separate infrastructure that could then be completely applied to Jewish music without altering anything, so too were the models of how to create continuity between veteran players, traditional players, and young audiences and young musicians who had no access to them prior. So the idea came to create a program that allowed both dynamic transmission from masters and dynamic transmission from records to players. It started as Yiddish Folk Art Institute in 1984 as part of a YIVO program and became later known as Klezmer, and it split with YIVO. It was created with the assistance of Adrienne Cooper, who you see here teaching a Yiddish song class, Becky Miller, and Lawrence Klamberg, who you see in the back of this photo accompanying the Yiddish song class, and who is still not only the lead singer of the Klezmatics, but also a sound archivist at YIVO. So we work there together. And Adrienne Cooper, who passed away in 2011, I believe, and she's very, very missed. Her role was extremely instrumental in this community building and also in a certain style of teaching Yiddish songs with a lot of context. So she was instrumental in the creation of the Sound Archive, in the creation of Klezmer, and in just setting a very high bar for a generous community in the Yiddish and Klezmer world. So this week-long Yiddish cultural retreat in the Catskills played a major role in the dissemination and teaching of klezmer music and in the formation of a kind of community of musical and aesthetic approach. As Henry Sapoznik told me in an interview, it created a course of study, a standardized repertoire, and a way of teaching when old players were still around. So, and here you see a photo with the who's who of Klezmer. I'm not going to go over it, but people in the audience might recognize some people on here. Now I want to talk a little bit more about the YIVO Sound Archive itself. So the sound recordings are present in over 130 YIVO archival collections pertaining to composers, to cantors, Yiddish choruses and orchestras, literature and theater, labor history. So over 20,000 commercial recordings are present on a lot of different mediums, such as wax cylinders. We now have about 20 wax cylinders in our collection of Jewish music, 78 RPM discs, LPs, compact disc, audio cassettes, and a few 8-track tapes, some piano rolls, and some random objects that make sound like plushy bobe that you can make talk by pushing on their hand. We also collect those artifacts. Folk songs, art songs, instrumental klezmer music, cantorial recording, theater, comedy, radio programs. The range is very broad. So this is what it looks like. This is the collection of 78 discs. This is the collection of LPs. And then there are boxes and boxes of archive throughout YIVO, including some of them that contain sound recordings. This is more of the sound archive. And so I was talking about a piano roll. So this is what a piano roll looks like. Let's see. I'll go a little bit quick on this. But this is based on a prayer. All right. The piano roll is a piece of paper with holes that indicate the rhythm and the height of the notes, and then it gets played into a piano. So that's what you just heard. So it is actually a type of sound recording, if one may say, on paper. Then I was talking about the wax cylinders that you can see here. Also some songs that are theater songs from as early as 1901. This is probably one of the earliest recording in the collection by Frank Seiden, and this is a song from the Kishevmacherin by Abraham Goldfaden. That was traditionally a woman's character performed by men actors, male. Sorry. Let's try again.
Neilen voor alle böjmer op a bergen läggan klein. Oj vakna kora ging bebejmelle in vilden vavalt allein. Oj vakna kora ging bebejmelle in vilden vavalt allein.
And as you can see, Seiden was also a prestidigitator. Here is a recording of Pepi Littman, who was known for performing in drag. She was part of a group of actors called the Brothers Singers. And this is a recording from Budapest in 1913. Sorry. So I only present snippets just so that we can go through a few more things. And I decided to also present some of these songs because I think the Klezmer revival sort of expanded to Yiddish songs a lot, and it was not so separated in the way this phenomenon existed. And what I think is very important to understand is that the archivists who worked at YIVO in the Sound Archive, so first Henry Sapoznik, and then Lawrence Klamberg, and then Jenny Romaine and Lawrence Klamberg, and then me as well, and other people who worked there, Matt Temkin, some people who interned, like Jake Schulman-Ment and Benji Foxrosen, are themselves musicians and performers and artists in their own right. So they always found material in the Sound Archive that went into their performances, and also they all have been teaching this music and disseminating it. And this is a very important sort of dynamic thing that has happened with the Sound Archive, where it was really created by people who wanted to access the material to create something new with it, and not just to have it as something to be preserved. So I think it's a very interesting story with the YIVO Sound Archive, that it really exists in a dynamic relationship with the people who are using it and creating sort of new artifacts that can also come into the archive. So here is some of the oldest recordings of Klezmer music that's been extensively used by people interested in Klezmer music. This is from the Belz Ruminsky Orchestra, and the recording was made in Bucharest in 1912. So that was Belz Orchestra, which has been, those recordings have been used by groups of musicians throughout the years, and recently, more recently in the past years, some French klezmer musician led by Amit Weisberger, did a project where they actually tried to imitate really closely the sound of this orchestra and recorded it on wax cylinder themselves. So there's also like some sort of interesting mirror play with this material and the bands today. And this is the same song, the same tune actually performed by Dave Taras that we talked about earlier, and who really brought a sophistication of style to the younger people at the time who could learn directly from him. Sorry about that. I couldn't cut off Dave Taras, so I didn't. But just to go on with a broader presentation of the YIVO Sound Archive and how it's nourished the Klezmer revival, there's also like a lot of recordings of cantorial music, and it's interesting because those recordings were actually very, very popular. So we have a lot of them, and they sometimes came to us in many, many copies, because that's actually what people were buying and hearing in their homes. And it's an older style of cantorial singing that is also now being revived, and there is work being done on this, especially the work of Jeremiah Lockwood documenting this phenomenon. So we can hear, this is also very hard to cut off, but we can hear a little bit of it. And it goes on. I think it is important for people who are learning klezmer music to actually be able to access these recordings, especially if they didn't grow up with this sound, because klezmer music is made of all these influences, and cantorial music obviously is an important one. There is also theater music that was interpreted by singers like Aaron Lebedev, who did have a cantorial background, but was then performing on theater stages. And here with orchestra directed by Alexander Olshanetsky, who was a giant of Yiddish theater music in the heyday. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, well, this one doesn't want to work, but I'll just move on. All of this is accessible. You just have to reach out to us if you can't find them elsewhere. And I will say, feel free to reach out to us at YIVO for any question about this music, and especially about accessing those recordings. So YIVO also has a big collection of radio programs, and including some of the Yiddish melodies in swing. And Henry Sapoznik has also done a lot of work on this radio collection in YIVO and outside of YIVO later after he left. And here is Dave Taras again. What's going on here? Okay, here.
He proudly presents the Barry Sisters, Burton Gay, Jan Bard, singing star of radio, Sam Medoff and the Yiddish Swing Tet. Oh, tell me, pretty maidens do, what is it all the lads say to you?
On that little secret, we'll let you in. We're so bright that they tell us, scheinst wie die Sinn. Wie scheinst wie die Sinn, in die Leucht wie die Levone. Deine Augen wie die Sterben, in den Himmel lachen seh ich wie Lasun. Dir zu sein ist mein Leben in Sekunde, wenn ich dir seh dich, wird mein Herz sich abreben.
Etc. And another very important side of YIVO's collection are the field recordings, and I will go very fast on this, but it's also a very important way that people are finding new music, new old music today through these field recording collections that are progressively becoming more accessible. And one of the very important one we put out is the one of Ruth Rubin that you might have heard of, immense folklorist who collected from groups of people and transcribed over 2,000 songs. She was herself a performer and used her adorable little notebooks to put together her programs and performed with them. So this is the website that came out in 2018 that contains most of her field recordings and more, and that we released in 2018 with a celebratory concert with many people from all around the world who came and performed songs from the Ruth Rubin collection. And this is just an example of, how much these collections are used. This is just a few albums that have used songs from the Ruth Rubin collection. And again, I'm expanding a little bit the topic of the talk here because I believe that sort of the continuation of the Klezmer revival is also a revival in Yiddish songs now. And one other very important collection of film recordings that is maybe underused is the collection of Hasidic music from Benedict Stembler. And you might recognize this recording, this tune from an album, I believe Frank London Brass All-Star. I don't remember if it's the Klezmatics of Frank London who did that, but anyway, this tune was revived, and probably through the work of Lawrence Klemberg as an archivist and a musician, and that's how kind of the song circulated. Oh, I'm so sorry. Etc. And then we have the YIVO Folk Song project that was led by Barak Shishmat Gimblet, and the Stonehill Jewish Song Archive. And I think I'm going to end here and again invite you to come and to our archive, to reach out if you need to access recordings, and really encourage everyone to continue making this place a living space that it has always been. And it started out of, again, this desire to create new things out of something that I think was perceived as a place of belonging. And we hope to create this for the future. Thank you.
Thank you for this wonderful talk, Eleanor. We've got some questions from the audience, and I have some questions as well. One thing I thought would be interesting to start with is just the difference between the concept of revival and revitalization. People often talk about the Klezmer revival, but I know that you're careful to call it the Klezmer revitalization. Maybe you could just put a fine point on that for us.
So it's interesting because I had a paragraph on that I decided to remove from the presentation to not just, get into too much of the weeds of that, but it's a really interesting question. And there has been a sort of debate continuously around those terms, and I decided to follow Michael Alpert's lead on that, who prefers the term revitalization as something that is, sort of injected with life rather than bring back to life, because there has been those threads of continuity. Even with all the ruptures that have happened, there always had been thread of continuity, and it made it possible for the next generation to like grab those threads and continue weaving from those. So I think it's a better word. It's a little bit harder to say. So sometimes just for ease, I say revival, and also because it's commonly used and it's okay. Nothing, too bad about using it. But it has, I think, revitalization has more the idea that what it wasn't actually dead. It didn't
One of
need
the,
to
yeah,
be revived. It needed to be revitalized, and this is the nuance.
one of the threads that you talked about that it could be interesting to pull a little bit is this transition moment where you have reissues happening for nostalgic reasons, then for other reasons, and maybe you could just explain a little bit more about that moment and what the folkways recordings that come later. What is different about those? Um,
Yeah, that's very interesting. When Sapozny talks about that, he emphasized the question of context and contextual and the need for context or contextualization or the absence of need of context. And I think when he talks about this sort of more nostalgic connection to the music, maybe he's talking about a generation that is also a little bit closer to the source in a way, but not always, because American Jews have immigrated. Sometimes it's already 2 or 3 generations away, even if we're talking about the 1950s, right? So I think that there was a need, though, and a desire to go a little bit deeper, those like memories or ideas that are just told as tale and repeated, and just go a little bit beyond that and start to have a bit more of a scholarly approach as well, and yeah, to provide context, because klezmer music, I think, just like the Yiddish language is a language of fusion, is also a music of fusion. And it's also, we're talking about a very broad geographical area and maybe a long time span. So having like nuance and understanding contexts where, and not, yeah, not like the professional status of the musicians, which the word klezmer was referring to originally, the Hebrew word meaning clay and zemer, instrument of song, was in Yiddish used to refer to the musicians, and their professional status. They were sort of part of some professional sort of caste, where the music was transmitted from father to son, where women were not really accepted, and so, and there's a lot of stories about how they were itinerant or things like that. In some places they were, in some places it was very territorial, actually, how klezmer bands operated. Details like that just like are like tale being told over and over. But then when you dig a little bit deeper, there are differences. And of course, like when you hear Dave Tara's recording, you can hear all the Ottoman influence in the music. And he was from Ternovka, and this region, like the Bessarabian region, parts of Romania and Bessarabia, it was completely at the crossroad of the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So like there was a tremendous amount of exchange. And this is where we have the most sources to know what klezmer sounded like in that particular area of the world. We have few sources about how it sounded in the northern Yiddish-speaking countries like Lithuania and Belarusian, etc. So, just I don't know. I don't know if I exactly answered your question, but I think that there was more of a desire to be more precise and to really understand what we were listening to.
And it's a fascinating example of how complicated this question of continuity is, because there are threads of continuity at the same time that there's discontinuity and there's distance, and musicians and scholars are navigating, a kind of complex array, a web of connection and disconnection. It's not simply a question of being connected or disconnected. One of the things that I find interesting is this question of the influence of other genres on klezmer, which I suppose is something that happened back in the day as well. But there's a way in which I think from our time point and from our kind of perspective, the cantorial records of the past, Yiddish theater music of the past, it's kind of it's easier to draw from it to kind of mix and match influences rather, as opposed to seeing them as more distinct genres, perhaps, with influence still threading across, in a different time. Okay, so some other questions that are coming from the audience. One, a little bit of a sensitive question, but maybe there's a little bit more that you can tell us. You mentioned some conflict between the quote unquote paper archivists and those wanting to expand YIVO's archives to include sound recordings. Is there anything else you can tell us about that?
Yeah, so I think that in the mind of the what I call the old guard of YIVO archivists. So at the time, some people were still, people who had lived in Vilna before the war, and I think that the archive, although YIVO had started as a place where there was a lot of collecting from the people, and it was really part of what it was to collect Jewish life as it was experienced by the Jewish people in Eastern Europe. There was sort of I think of a hierarchy in the minds of people in those days where, there was higher culture and lower culture. And so the music wasn't seen as something as valuable. And it was considered, a popular form of art. And the klezmorim, the musicians playing this music back in Europe, had a very low social status generally, and maybe that sort of representation kind of was still a little bit remaining. I don't know. This is an assumption. I'm not sure, but so. Yeah, it was just not seen as maybe as valuable by some of the archivists who really, were great scholars and were really caring about all the paper material and the written culture, and not so much about the oral tradition that klezmer music was a music of oral tradition.
We've got a few practical questions, which maybe you can take together. So some are asking about how much is digitized and how to access it, and if there's any fee for using material or for accessing material, for using material, and also how to access material when you're not in New York. For example, one viewer is working on a dissertation but lives in Berlin.
Mm-hmm. So there can be multiple answers to this, and the best way to get into specific of what you need is to write to us, Sound Archives, plural, at yivo.org, or my own email, or you can find my email easily on the YIVO staff page on the website. Okay, so how much is digitized? A portion of the collections are digitized. And so we have some of the field recordings, the Ruth Rubin collection, the Ben Stonehill collection, those are digitized. Some commercial material is digitized, but it is not our priority. We prioritize our unique recordings and also recordings that were made on magnetic tapes, because those are the most the material that degrade the most. Even though they're more recent, they're actually less stable than some of the, shellac 78s. They're actually, if they're properly stored, they can just last forever. The magnetic tape, as they can be stored the best way possible, they will still degrade. So we try to digitize those first. We digitized a lot of YIVO events. It's called the Yud Lamed Kan Folklore Club, that includes a lot of lectures and by eminent Yiddishists. The Historiker Kreis, the Dialect Project of Bina Weinreich. So some projects that were done within YIVO over the years. And we can provide access to some of this material that is not yet necessarily online. So, write to us if you look for something. Also, as in many, many archives and libraries, there is a backlog of things that are not necessarily cataloged or not necessarily visible in the catalogs. So please reach out to us when you have a research question, and we can tell you if there is something there. This said, is that archive.cj?
Yeah, that's cjh.org. Yeah.
.org is our archival portal. So, that's a good place to look for material. And we are, continuing to populate it with more of the collections that haven't been yet described. So, in a place like that, where things have accumulated over decades and the archival, practices have evolved, we do have a very big backlog of materials. So we are, little by little, continuing to do the work that Mark Slubin was talking about in 1982.
There's a question about copyright for old recordings. I know that it's dependent on which recording, but do you have any overarching advice other than inviting people to be in touch about questions about copyright?
There is a number of years that needs to have passed. This is information that somehow doesn't stuck to my brain in my brain, but so I think it's 100 years maybe. So I think that recordings that predate 1925 now, but take this with a grain of salt. There might be more. Oh, thank you. Everything over 95 years old is public domain, right? But for more recent things, you do due diligence, and and you try to find the people, and yeah, the copyright issue can be a little complicated. We don't always provide the service, but we can, we help as much as we can.
Wonderful. So just maybe a final question to end on. I love your way of conceptualizing the archive as a living space, and the idea that there's something distinctive about having archivists who are themselves practitioners. And I wonder if you could just share any final thoughts on that aspect of it.
Right. I mean, and also public program directors that are themselves practitioners and composers and use the archive. I mean, yeah, it's yeah, it's interesting. So for me, I wrote my dissertation about about this aspect specifically of the archives, and the title of my dissertation is The Archive as a Living Space. And I'm interested in looking at it with like three main scales of observation. My background was in geography, so I like to look at space and change scales. The first scale is really, the recording themselves, and each recording, each piece of music is a window to maybe the world of its composer, maybe the world, all the worlds where it has been performed in, and itself, it brings you all these to all these places. Then you have the place of the archive, with shelves and objects that need to be mapped. For me, the archivist, the cataloger, is kind of a geographer, a cartographer of the archives, because that's really what we try to do, is to know where is what, and what is where, and what is what. So we open those boxes and try to figure out where does this go, what it is, and to document all of that, and to provide enough context for people to be able to access and evaluate if they need the thing. And then the third aspect is even like sort of broader, and how the archives kind of is brought to other places by us, by performers, and how cultural transfers happen in that way. So, sorry, I'm not exactly responding to your question, but I feel like, for example, in during the pandemic, Ilana, can't I remember her last name right now? Violinist from the UK. I'm so sorry, blank. Kravitz, thank you. Ilana Kravitz had scans from Berezovsky's manuscripts, his fourth volume of Nigunim and Tish Nigunim. So Berezovsky was an immense ethnomusicologist from the 1920s, 30s. He collected himself. He also inherited the collection from the Ansky exhibition and cataloged that, and worked throughout the 1950s. He died in 1961, if I recall correctly. But so Ilana Kravitz had a scan of his fourth volume of unpublished Nigunim, and she didn't have the permission to spread it around. So she decided during the pandemic to send just a few Nigunim to a whole bunch of musicians, so that they would create YouTube videos of them performing them. And that was sort of an indirect way to publish the material, right? And in that way, she also kind of created another archive on top of this archive, kind of a recursive thing. And so, that's how an archive can be like very, very much alive. And yes, the work of Lawrence Klamberg has been, incredibly rich, because he's been performing all around the world, teaching all around the world, and using material from the Sound Archive. I think that the song Schnirele Perele, it became really, really well known after the Klezmatics started to perform it. Adrian Cooper taught it to them at Klez Camp. So, that's how sort of like certain tunes become very widespread. Of Saposhkelech. Saposhkelech was the fruit of Michael Alpert's collecting, and then he taught it all over the world. And it's now like a big staple of Yiddish summer programs everywhere.
Well, Eleanor, thank you so much for continuing this wonderful work that you've spoken about. And I know I speak for many people in the audience who are grateful for your contributions to the Sound Archive, in addition to this wonderful talk. So thank you so
Thank
much.
you. And to access more resources from anywhere, please reach out and I can send a list of links and resources.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. And Julia, thank you as well.